So, welcome back. Ask Coach Nate, episode 20. Today, we're going to ask Coach Nate some questions about how to better incorporate rest and recovery into your training program. So, Nate, why don't we start with what we know about rest and recovery and how important it is to training and achieving a high level of fitness.
Yeah, I mean, I guess in the big picture, I feel like establishing a reasonable balance between training stress and recovery is one of the key ways in which I'll think about training. And obviously, like depending on where you are in your training program and what your goals are, you might have different tactics at any given moment throughout the season. But you always want to have like enough training stress that you're going to drive your body to get fitter, and you want to have enough recovery so that your body can adapt when you're between sessions. Because it's like no matter how cool your training is and you go out and do intervals, like that workout itself doesn't really do anything for your fitness. It's the workout combined with adequate recovery in the days afterwards that allows you to develop better fitness and to keep moving forward in your fitness journey. So I feel like there's often a lot of emphasis on doing good workouts, doing good training, whatever your training plan is. And even when it comes to recovery, a lot of people focus on like how easy your easy sessions should be. And that's all good and well, but you definitely want to also incorporate like good sleep habits, good hydration habits, good nutritional habits that overall will help your body have what it needs to be able to adapt to those hard workouts that you're doing. So you create a training stress, and then with enough time and nutrition and rest or easy sessions, you hopefully get better, and then you do another hard session, and you just keep inching forward day after day.
Yeah, lots of people talk about digging themselves into the hole, right? Where they haven't gotten enough rest and they see their performance decline. And so then they keep training harder and they can't really get where they need to go.
Yeah, totally.
Okay, so I think again we've established like, hey, you train hard and then you rest and you sleep, and everyone, I think it's pretty well known that that's when like human growth hormone, like all that stuff happens in your sleep, right? That's when your body actually repairs and recovers and becomes stronger. So getting rest is pretty obvious why you need to do it. So how do people go about like making sure they're getting the right amount of rest, and how do you suggest people like gauge that, and how do you incorporate it into your training program?
Yeah, so I mean, I think in the big picture, a lot of times you want to think about having just 2 or 3 pretty high quality sessions each week, and then you can have 2, 3, 4 or more like easier sessions that aren't going to really add a lot of stress to your body, but do maintain like aerobic conditioning or maybe some strength conditioning, like if you go to the gym. But those sessions aren't generally going to be that hard. So you could do those day in and day out and not really get tired from them. But most people will do well to have 1 or 2 days of total rest each week, maybe more depending on their schedule constraints. But I think that if you have those like harder sessions, it's good to, yeah, plan to have a good sleep routine where you sleep adequately, but even more importantly, that you sleep consistent hours and that you go to bed at a similar time and you wake up at a similar time, not just so that you are getting the sleep that you need in total quantity, but that you're reinforcing good, solid circadian rhythms and that you maximize that spike in growth hormone that you were talking about. Because like generally throughout the day, we have rise and fall of like cortisol and growth hormone and other hormones that kind of regulate how our bodies function. But if that's disrupted because you go to sleep at 11 one night and then 2 another night and then 9 another night, and you're waking up at like 6 during the weekdays and you're waking up at 8 on the weekend, your body's going to be a little bit confused about when exactly it needs to be releasing a lot of growth hormone, when it needs to have a big spike in cortisol as you're getting up in the morning, and it just won't recover as well. So even if you're just getting 7 hours of sleep each night, but it's very consistent, that might actually be better than if you have variable sleep quantity and sleep timing. And so you want to make sure that you are doing that. You want to make sure that whenever you're sweating a lot, you're getting adequate hydration. And especially in the hours after any high quality session, you want to make sure that you're getting enough carbohydrate and protein so that you have fuel coming in that can be stored to get ready for the next session, and that you have protein available to build up new enzymes and build up new structural proteins that allow your body to get fitter for the next session. A lot of research that focuses on acute recovery from one session to the next highlights the need for carbohydrate, but that's a very one-dimensional approach, just because that only measures like how well you can repeat some sort of exertion in the short term, but it doesn't measure over the course of a season, for example, how much fitter you're going to get from doing those sessions, which is going to be partly a function of like how well you can do training, which is a function of carbohydrate intake largely, but it won't, like, just looking at one session to the next over the course of a few days or a week, that won't tell you anything about your trajectory of fitness, which is going to be more a function of protein metabolism. So all of those things factor in, and you just want to make sure that you have good habits in all of those areas and not just focus on having hard sessions and easy sessions and days off. A lot of people just focus on those things and they completely ignore the importance of the other things. And you can imagine having two people that have the exact same training program and maybe have the exact same talent and capacity to adapt to that training program. But if one of them is like eating just a little bit better, hydrating just a little bit better, and sleeping a little more consistently, they might have an awesome season, whereas the other person might be like constantly a little bit tired and a little behind on the recovery, even though the actual training is identical, but just because of all their other habits are not supporting their recovery.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. I've heard some people talk about only training up to 80%. Do you have a perspective on this? I think it was like, it wasn't in cycling. It was in, Ultimate Fighting. There was a guy who is the coach of George St. Pierre, my favorite Ultimate Fight. I used to be a massive, like, at one point, and I loved George St. Pierre, GSP from Montreal. It was his coach who said, generally he recommends that people go at about 80%. Like, don't put everything into your training. And he thought that it allowed you to get more days of training in that were of quality, and saving the hard sessions for fights or for competition.
Yeah, so I think that is generally pretty good advice. I think it depends on exactly the scale and like how you would think of that. Because on the one hand, I think that's really effective if you think about somebody that's maybe coming off of their off season in October and November, and maybe they were training, maybe they were taking total rest, but they're not super fit. They're like maybe active, but whatever. They're just like starting out. At that point, like, you're not going to benefit from going out and murdering yourself doing hard sessions. Like, you're just going to get tired and you're going to burn yourself out. So like the first month or two, you just want to build up some general conditioning, do some modest efforts, build up some strength at the gym, but nothing crazy. But throughout, let's say this time of year, like January, February, March, April, you're getting ready for like racing in the spring and summer months, or you're getting ready for whatever your target goals are for the year. Like, you want to slowly be ramping up and building fitness. But yeah, you don't want to like do a lot of full gas efforts and a lot of really kind of peak workouts in February, because you could reach for some sort of peak fitness in like March, let's say, but then you'll be tired, or you'll have to take a break and recover and then build up again. So in general, if I'm thinking about a training cycle, depending on when it is that somebody's trying to peak, I would think about the first month or two of aerobic conditioning or the first month or two of strength conditioning as just like getting the ball rolling, getting the foundation built. And then for most of the time doing like, 75, 80% total effort. So it's like, you're getting good workouts, you're getting good recovery. Mostly you feel good. You very rarely feel very tired. But then when you are shooting for like peak fitness, it really is helpful in that last like 5 to 8 weeks to do a couple of really full gas hard sessions each week. And so early in the season, you might do more moderate workouts. Later on, you might do fewer workouts that are like high quality, but the quality of those workouts would be very high to get to really peak shape.
How many days off do you think people should take? Is there any rule of thumb?
I think for most people, it's heavily contingent on what their work schedule is and whether or not they like how, like what kind of schedule they can work with for their training. But on average, for many of the people that I work with and for many people that I like advise, it makes sense that if they have like a Monday through Friday kind of traditional work schedule, and especially if they have like kids or anything else, I often plan around a 5-day training schedule. If they have a lot of flexibility and they've been doing it for a while and they're trying to do like road racing or endurance mountain biking, where total training volume is going to be very helpful for them. I'll often plan around a 6-day training week. But really, like going from 4 to 5 to 6, you do get better fitness if you can handle that. But again, it's a matter of like the stress and recovery balance. Like if 6 days a week is just going to tire you out, it's going to be better to have 2 days of total rest and just train 5 days a week and have like the free time on those 2 days off to do other things, and just have like a good, work life and training balance that is going to help you to have less psychological stress, less lost sleep and sleep disruption. That's going to allow you to make more gains out of those 5 days a week than if you had like a 6th day a week, for example.
Yeah. Uh, on the hydration side, like I actually found that to be really critical for me. It's one of the reasons I stopped drinking alcohol was it made me dehydrated, and I found it difficult to get the hydration that I needed. Do you have any specific advice around like hydration and nutrition and like how to incorporate that into your recovery plan?
Yeah. So the alcohol question is a good one because not only does it make you a little bit dehydrated, or depending on how much you drink, it can make you a little bit or a lot dehydrated. But
Yeah,
also it,
you ever had like one drink? I felt like extra dehydrated, and that was why I stopped because I still like enjoy drinking, and it's funny because people meet me and like it's still almost taboo to like not drink at all.
yeah,
Just I couldn't like if I had even one beer, I just didn't feel like I could get the hydration that I needed to feel comfortable. So
yeah, it's challenging. So it does increase urine production and makes you dehydrated. It also makes it easier to fall asleep, but it really reduces your sleep quality. So that's another thing, like especially for people that do have like a nightcap and it's like a part of their evening routine that maybe not every night, but sometimes they have like an evening drink. It's like that might feel fine, but it's not really helpful as far as like total recovery and total rest is concerned. Um, so that's another thing. It's kind of like junk miles. Like you could go ride an extra couple hours on Saturday. But if you're riding at like 50% of threshold, you're literally just making yourself tired. You're not doing enough that's going to like provide a useful training stress. And it's like, it's not productive. Likewise, like if you fall asleep faster, but your sleep quality is reduced, like that's not helpful. But as far as like the acute issue of dehydration, whether it's from alcohol consumption or just because it was hot out, generally most athletes don't need to be worried about taking in too much sodium. And I think it's unfortunate there's a ethos in our culture that like sodium is generally bad, but it's like sodium is great. And in general, it's much easier to have a problem by not getting enough sodium than it is to have too much, unless you are not very active, you're hypertensive, and you just generally have health problems. But that's not 95% of endurance athletes. Most of them could just benefit from drinking as much as they feel thirst for and eating as much salty food as they feel like they are going to appreciate. And if you are noticing that you're dehydrated, or especially after longer sessions or harder sessions, like if you feel lightheaded or you like kind of black out a little bit, if you are sitting on the couch and then you stand up, like that's basically just a sign of low blood volume. And it's a signal that you should be having more fluid and more sodium to increase your blood volume, which is a common thing, especially after endurance sessions in the summertime.
yeah. I found that. So I do like at least one kind of tablet in my water bottle for recovery, like after almost every session.
Yeah.
I can feel it. Like I can tell if I drink the water, it's not hydrating enough. And
Yeah.
I need the salt. So I can almost do it by feel.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, water is pretty useless on its own. It's only in the context of having antidiuretic hormone and sodium that water is useful. Because like if you did go out and do a training session and you sweat a lot, you lost fluid, but you also lost a lot of salt. And having just water, that maybe helps a little bit, especially if you're like really dehydrated. But really, it's key to get in a lot of sodium. And depending on how much you sweat sodium, like you could be down a few grams of sodium by the end of a long ride. So you would need to just like eat up like a whole bag of really salty potato chips to even come close to getting enough. So people often underestimate how much sodium they've lost during their harder long sessions. So it's really key to get a lot with their fluid. And if you drink a lot of water and sodium, like your body will figure it out. So it's like you don't need to be too worried about taking a lot of salt. If you are also drinking plenty of water, your body wants to establish homeostasis in blood sodium levels and blood volume levels. So it's like your body just wants to have the substrates it needs to build those things up. And then to your other question about nutrition, like the biggest thing is like just eat a lot of healthy foods that are mostly going to be plants, maybe some grains, depending on how intense your training is to get more carbohydrate. You know, animal proteins are probably fine. It's maybe debatable like whether or not that's optimal, but it's generally fine. But as long as you're eating mostly plants and mostly not processed foods, your diet is probably like more or less in the direction you want it to be in. But specifically for training, during and immediately after, it's really key to get extra carbohydrate in proportion to how intense and how long your sessions are. And if you finish a long ride with intervals, like you could probably have 500 to 1,000 calories in the first hour or two afterwards, mostly carbs and some protein to help jumpstart your recovery.
What do you think about some of the more exotic recovery options? You know, there's like the moon boots that supposedly encourage they encourage blood flow. Is that what's supposed to happen? Or the ones that like inflate and they constrict around your legs, right? You've got the moon boots, you've got ice baths. I've seen some of the cryo cooling stuff. There's a lot of like really exotic concepts when it comes to rest and recovery. Like, do you have any thoughts on any of these? Like, do you use any of them? Like, do you know anyone who use them? Do you think they have any value?
So I think some of those things could have some value. Generally, cooling can be effective, it seems, for short-term recovery. So especially if you're looking at like track and field athletes who have to compete through a series of heats and then the finals, doing like ice baths or something in between sessions, especially if they have to do like, let's say 3 1,500 meter races over the course of a week or something, like, because they're at the Olympics and they have like the qualifying and then the quarterfinals and the finals. Like that's a lot of stress, and you're not training, you're not trying to recover and get fitter. You're just trying to recover and be able to execute again. So that's very different than day in and day out. I'm training today, I'm recovering tomorrow, I'm trying to get fitter, and I'm shooting for something that's months from now. In that context, icing is almost certainly not going to be effective, because like it doesn't matter if I feel great tomorrow. It matters if I am fit in several months. And a part of what drives fitness and recovery and adaptation is the inflammation process. And ice baths shut down the inflammation process or reduce it at least. Likewise, taking ibuprofen daily is not going to be helpful for long-term adaptations. It's not a problem. Like some people, I don't know, there's a tendency to think like, oh, ibuprofen is bad, you should never have it, or you need inflammation to like heal from an injury. Sometimes you need ibuprofen or some NSAID to like reduce inflammation for an injury, but taking it daily, taking ice baths daily, it's not going to be helpful for your long-term progress as an athlete. Something that enhances blood flow without impinging on inflammation and the natural healing process can be helpful. So some of those compression leggings could be cool, but they're also expensive, and it's like a whole thing that you have to like sit on the couch with your legs in these things, where it's like you could just have compression socks. Or one thing that I'll often do is after a hard training session, or if my training is challenging overall, and maybe like each day isn't hard, but overall I'm feeling kind of strained a little bit in training, I'll often, get home, before I shower, before I change, before I do anything, I'll like start snacking, like literally within the first 5 minutes of getting in. And then after I've eaten something, I'll shower, and then I'll rub my legs with like a stick type roller. So I'll like massage them basically. And that's helpful in the same way that those compression leggings are helpful in that it helps drive blood flow. And it also can maybe be helpful in reducing myofascial adhesions. So like tension or like stickiness between the fascia and the muscle fibers, and it just helps you to maintain like flexibility, as it were. And one thing that I'm not as familiar with like the studies about are the electronic stimulating recovery devices, which a lot of people seem to swear by, and it won't have the same kind of downside of like either taking anti-inflammatory drugs or having anti-inflammatory therapies like ice baths. And it seems appealing, but it's also a whole thing that you have to like have this expensive product and set it up. And it's like a lot of time and effort that most people training 5 days a week, 10 hours a week, and working 9 to 5 and then have kids to take care of, like it's probably not worth it for the time and effort and cost involved,
I've tried to.
when
I think our team at one point had a deal on the electronic. Is it electrolysis of your muscles? Is that what's happening? It pulses electricity.
Yeah, it makes your muscles fire.
Yeah, and it was wild stuff. Like you put these pads on, and then you can see your muscles just start reacting, and
yeah, it's fun.
Yeah,
some people swear by it.
Yeah, for me, like the jury is out on a lot of these things. Like I looked into the constricted blood flow systems. There's tons of them, right? Like
yeah,
you talked about the socks. There's the high end equipment. Like I wasn't. It seems to me like the science is not clear. There's a lot of people who seem to say that the socks don't really do anything, but the UCI does have rules about them. So there's people who think that they do matter. So it's hard for me to understand exactly what's going on. I did hear that like they do use those types of machines in the hospital that constrict blood flow.
Yeah.
That those are like really expensive. And my understanding was that the constriction power is like really high, so that it made me think that like what you get in a home setup like might not have the same result that like an industrial like hospital level type of device would. But I don't know, at a high level, like if you feel like it works for you, like go for it.
I mean, I think that is the case for a lot of things. Like there's not probably much downside. I wouldn't be in favor of proactively like icing or cooling most of the time, maybe sometime in acute circumstances, but generally not most of the time. If anything, I actually would be really interested in studies about possibly enhancing inflammation by like getting in a hot tub, for example, after hard sessions. There's times when you definitely wouldn't want to do that, but that's beyond the scope of this discussion. But generally, like if it helps you to feel good, go for it. But if it's like really time consuming and really costly, and it's like you would probably do better to just make sure that you have a good sleep schedule, that you're hydrating, that you have good nutrition, and those things, like you kind of have to be sleeping, you have to be eating. And if you're spending a lot of time and effort on things that maybe you're going to get you a 2% gain at like not even 2%, like 0.2% gain, where you could be spending time like training or sleeping or like doing other things that are important to you, I would focus on the pragmatic nature of focusing on the things that are actions that will actually make a big difference. So nutrition, sleep, hydration, and training effectively, and not spending 10 hours researching which helmet is going to save you 2 watts if you're time trialing. I feel like there's a thing in cycling where a lot of times people get really caught up with like very nitpicky things when they like lose sight of the big picture. Just like train adequately hard to develop the stress that you need to get better, give yourself enough recovery, and keep repeating it.
You could just shave your legs. That's almost free. So
yeah, exactly. Like that's more valuable than spending an extra $300 on a helmet that you spent 10 hours researching.
The lighter component or whatever. Yeah. What's also interesting is like the ice bath one is something that I looked into too, and I do see track and field athletes doing it. But someone said to me that like, hey, if that stuff worked, there'd be an ice bath on every World Tour cycling team bus, and there's not. Yeah. So it makes me think that like there's a lot of money invested into World Tour cycling teams to uncover like the science that works and doesn't. Yeah. It makes me think that at least for how cycling works, and there might be dynamics that are different than in track and field.
Yeah, it's a little bit different. It's interesting.
Not valuable, yeah.
Totally. Yeah, I feel like it's interesting. That's a good distinction to make because track and field, there's a lot more impact, especially like the higher paced things. So it's like if you're a sprinter and you're doing the 100, the 200, and the 400, and you have to do like a dozen events over the course of like 5 days because you're at the World Championships and you have to qualify to get the final, and then you have to do the final, but you've already done like 10 sprints over the last 3 or 4 days. Like that's very different, and there's so much more trauma to your muscles because of the impact that it is maybe more beneficial to reduce inflammation because of the stress on your muscles. That's different than cycling where there's like no impact. So even the top sprinters are doing a ton of power, but they're not dealing with that pounding and the impact that's going to tear their muscles apart in the same way. And like you said, those teams spend millions of dollars running like they would have ice baths on their buses if it was worthwhile. Likewise, they do a lot of things, like partly because they have companies that have invested a lot of money in their products that they're going to give them to Pro Tour teams so that they'll use them so they can try to pitch that XYZ Pro Tour team uses XYZ product so that they can sell it because they already spent a lot of money in like non-medical grade compression products, for example, like that, something like that. But maybe the Pro Tour teams use them, but they also have all of their time in the world to focus on training and recovery. And there's only so much training that they can do. Like even high volume athletes are doing like 30 hours a week. So that still leaves like 50 or 60 hours a week that they just have to hang around, eat dinner, cook, watch TV, and maybe put on some like compression leggings, you know? But it's like, if you're working 9 to 5, you're trying to get an hour and a half to 2 hours of training in after work, like 3 days a week and longer on the weekends. Like it's probably not worth like an hour of your time to set up a product like that, you know, 2 or 3 times a week.
You know, I think that if you look at what World Tour cycling teams do, and cyclists in general, and what you can learn as an amateur, the focus on nutrition and proper eating. I mean, I can't think of another sport where there's so much focus on it, right? So that for me is the cue that diet matters, and diet matters maybe the most in cycling, in addition to like the hydration and the recovery, but making sure that you're eating properly. And yeah, I think that it's a complicated question because I think it's different for different people, but there's so much focus on it. Like it's maybe the number one thing, I think, at least if I was to evaluate what the pros do, because I can't think of another sport where they focus on it that closely, except for maybe something like bodybuilding, where
Yeah,
like
bodybuilding and runners
really
too, like really high energy sports that also maybe require you to not be very large. Because like swimmers eat a lot because they train a lot,
Yeah.
but having an extra 5 or 10 pounds of body fat is actually helpful because it helps with buoyancy. But like runners and cyclists, they're doing so much training, they're burning so many calories, but they also want to be light. So they want to be as fit as possible without putting on any extra weight. And then of course, like bodybuilding as well. Obviously they have maybe other issues with chemical assistance perhaps, but that's a different issue.
Yeah, we've had
But
that.
even then they still have to focus on nutrition, you know, like no matter how many drugs you take, if you're a bodybuilder, like you still have to have a good diet to, you know, get the results that you're looking for.
Correct. And cycling as well, right? Like obviously the nutrition is a huge focus. I've even heard people say that in the cycling world, if you believe that they've cleaned it up and there isn't the like prevalent use of drugs like there was in the past, it means that the focus on nutrition is even higher, because like that's one area where they can get an edge still.
Yeah. Yeah, and it makes a big difference. Like I think that if you think about if you could just recover 2%, 5% better after each workout because you had 100, 150 grams of carbohydrate, 20, 30 grams of protein within the first hour or two, like if you did that after every hard session versus just kind of snacking how you felt or like missing a few sessions a week where you don't eat for a couple hours, like that will make a big difference. The same with sleeping and staying hydrated. But whether or not you like did some random like compression protocol is not going to make that kind of a difference.
So what do you do specifically recovery, like in, I guess like some more, so how about some specifics, right? Like, do you prescribe to the timing, like after your session, you need to like drink a protein shake or eat, or within a certain, I think usually people say 1 hour.
Yeah, so I would think of most things as a curve. So your body is more sensitive right afterwards, and then it slowly declines. It seems that some of the research that Stacy Sims and others have done indicates that it is even more important for female athletes to really front load their recovery more than for male athletes, and depending on what time of month and the hormone levels that they have. So like in the first half of the cycle it matters less and the first hour or two is probably fine, but in the second half of the menstrual cycle it really helps to front load it and make sure you get something in within the first 30 to 60 minutes. I think just from like a practical like habit forming standpoint, eating as soon as you're done training or as soon as you get home after training, and minimizing the time between the finish of your session and when you start refueling and rehydrating just makes it easy. So for me, like I think it's just easy and practical and effective to like finish my ride, go home, like get inside, start with some sort of fluid, some sort of salt, and some sort of carbohydrate that usually has some protein mixed in, and then shower and then have a little bit more of a snack afterwards. And if you're training hard, even after your easy sessions, you want to still have good recovery food, because even though that session wasn't that hard, you're still trying to recover from the hard workout yesterday to get ready for the hard workout tomorrow. So maybe you just spun out your legs for an hour or two today, but you burned some calories. You're still in the hole from yesterday. So you might as well use the enhanced insulin sensitivity and ability to recover at that moment in time. So generally, I would say for most people, have as a baseline, like 400 to 500 calories, mostly carbs, some protein, generally like 20 grams of protein, maybe 25 grams of protein after every session. If it's a really hard session or it's a really long session, I would bump that up to like 600 to 1,000 calories, depending on how big the athlete is and how many calories they spent. So like obviously like fitter athletes that just do more power burn more calories and they're in more of a calorie hole at the end. So like for me, if I do a really long ride that's hard, I'll eat 1,000 calories within the first 60 to 90 minutes after the session. And that'll include like 2 water bottles worth of fluid or more, depending on how warm it is. And it'll be like mostly carbs, let's say like 600 to 800 calories of carbs, probably like 30 grams of protein, maybe 35 grams, and then just like a random mix of fat, depending on what it is specifically that I'm eating.
So, because I'm always obsessed with like measurement, and I think this recovery area is really interesting because it's hard for me to understand like how if I'm actually improving my recovery or not, right? Because I can't like rewind it and then do something different and then see what the result would be, right?
Yeah.
So, how does someone gauge if they're recovering well and if they need to make changes to improve their recovery, right? Like, because everyone's going to feel tired, everyone's going to feel hungry, everyone's going to be like, oh, I don't know, I got to do it again tomorrow. That sounds like a lot, you know? So, what should people like look at, or is there indicators, or yeah, how do you understand like if you're recovering well and if you need to make it better? Like, is there any way to kind of make that determination?
So like we briefly mentioned before, like in the very short term, so like over the course of like a day, hydration and carbohydrate intake are the biggest factors. So for hydration, for the most part, that's pretty easy. Like if you feel lightheaded, if you feel like you need a nap like an hour after your training, and your urine is not clear, or if it is clear but you're lightheaded, that just means you're not getting enough sodium. Like your blood is still hasn't reached its normal volume again because you've been consuming water, but you're just peeing it out because you're not retaining it because you don't have enough sodium. Like you should get more salt, get more fluids. If you feel like junk the day after a hard session, like that might just be because it was a hard session. But if you can't recover between hard sessions over the course of 2 or 3 days, you probably will want to look at increasing your carbohydrate intake after each session. And it's like, it's hard to overdo it. Like if you can comfortably consume a certain amount of food that's mostly carbs with some protein after a training session, like your body is most receptive and sensitive to those calories right after training. So it's like, if you overdid it by 20 or 30%, if you're going to take in extra calories at any time of day, like that's the time to do it. And if anything, like you could trim calories on other meals, but if you're having more right after training, you're going to be maximizing recovery. So longer term though, like week after week, if you think your training volume seems totally reasonable, or it's what you're used to and you can tell that it's like not excessive, but you're feeling really run down, I would consider whether or not you could make some dietary adjustments to enhance your recovery, whether or not you're like missing something like iron, for example, in your diet. That's a thing that could be monitored with blood work. But if you just don't feel good in training, you should look at whether or not you need to reduce your training stress, get better sleep, or enhance your diet somehow. And sometimes it's like you might be doing the exact same training that worked for you last season, and you might be having a great dietary practices, especially if you have like habits that you just kind of do day in and day out. But maybe just work is stressful, or the pandemic's stressful. Like there's other factors. And so I feel like a lot of times we need to pay attention to just stress as a whole on our body, because like mental emotional stress, stress about our taxes, stress about like not seeing people in person very much, people doing, I don't know, construction that like wakes you up in the morning and it's disrupting your sleep. Like anything that negatively impacts your body's like physical resilience can show up in your training sessions. So sometimes we just need to adjust our training if we can't handle it from like getting enough sleep and hydration and calories intake. But in general, like you can't have too many calories right after training unless it's displacing fluid intake that you need. So sometimes if it is hot and you sweat a lot, start with fluid and then have calories, or have calories in the form of liquid before you move to solid foods, because solid foods will slow down gastric emptying. So if you get home and you have solid food and then have fluid, it'll slow down both of those.
Yeah, I always want to take a nap after my session though. So I don't know if that means I'm getting enough salt or not, but I'll look into it. Well, hey, I think that's some great advice. I mean, any last words or feedback for people who want to recover better?
I mean, I think that just don't focus only on TSS. Don't focus only on training volume. Think about all of the stresses in your life that are taking a toll on your body, and think about all the ways that you can enhance your body's ability to handle that stress. Because like, good sleep, good nutrition, good hydration, getting hard sessions at the right times and easier sessions or off days at the right times is all great. And in addition to that, even just something like going for a 10-minute walk to clear your mind and reduce your emotional stress sometimes can make a difference, where just your overall experience of stress, physically and mentally and emotionally, all can contribute to how your body handles training stress.
Yeah. The only thing I'd add is like, I think there's a lot of people getting into cycling and they're overachievers and they train really hard. And someone I know who races and he's real fast, he told me, hey, if you feel tired and you think you need an extra day off, like you should just take it. And maybe that's the best advice I ever got. Cause I'm the kind of person who like, no matter how tired or sore or however I feel, like I am determined to get through the workout. And so for me, sometimes just like listening to your body and just giving it a break every once in a while is that absolutely the right thing to do. So that's the only thing I would add to this. Well,
Yeah.
this is great. Anything else?
No, that's good. Listen to your body. That's always great advice. Pay attention to your body and listen to it.
Yeah. Well, hey, like this video, subscribe to the channel, and we'll be back next week. Thank you very much.
Bye.